Okay, so we're just going to get started. I want to invite and thank everyone for joining us so far with Homeless Connect Toronto as we facilitate this webinar on adapting service offerings to a post-pandemic normal. For some basic housekeeping, if you haven't done so already, please make sure you're on mute and turn your video off to limit any noises and distractions during the webinar. Before we begin, for any of you who are not familiar with Zoom, or you're maybe familiar but not with all the features, one of the best ways to set up your screen for viewing both the slides and the videos of the speakers, you can go to the top of the Zoom window and click on View Options. You'll see a drop-down menu as shown in the slide, and just choose side-by-side mode. That way you can always see the speaker who's speaking as well as the notes and the slides that are being presented.
Hi, Mel. Hi, everyone.
Okay. Hi, Alex. We're just telling everyone to mute themselves and to turn their videos off just to make sure that it's less distracting during the presentation. So we'll just do that. If you can do that for us, that would be great. Thanks, Alex. Okay, so I just want to introduce myself really briefly. I'm the Executive Director of Homeless Connect Toronto. We decided to have this presentation for a variety of reasons, and we really felt that it would be helpful to the sector and to our colleagues in the sector. I'm joined today by my colleague from Homeless Connect Toronto, Bonnie Tang. She serves as a volunteer co-chair, and she's actually going to be hosting the majority of this webinar today. Bonnie's going to be introducing herself briefly, and then we'll dive right into our presentations.
Yep, thanks, Melody. So as Melody mentioned, I'm Bonnie. I've been volunteering with Homeless Connect for a number of years. And during the day, I work at Bridgeable, and that's a service design consultancy firm. What that means is that I work with a lot of organizations to really design and transform their experiences and their services to make sure that they're always grounded in user needs. To give you a sense of what we'll be covering in the next hour, we're going to start off sharing a bit about Homeless Connect Toronto. Some of you may be familiar with us, but for those who aren't, we want to give you a little bit of a background of our organization and what we do. We'll also be sharing back some of the survey results to play back what's top of mind for everyone in the audience. And then we'll be passing on the mic to our friends at Away Home Canada, as well as Stella's Place, so that they can share some of their learnings, best practices, and challenges from their own experiences. We're going to then have a Q&A session from the audience, and then wrap it up for the day.
So since 2013, Homeless Connect Toronto has been coordinating an annual one-stop shop event for individuals experiencing or at risk of homelessness. Most of our work consists in partnership with community and service agencies, businesses, and city services from across the city of Toronto. And along with our community volunteers, we connect with these individuals and bring in supports to connect them to supports and resources that can help them end homelessness in their lives. Collaboration is a key part of our organization and the importance, and we really think it's important to learn and work together and to learn from each other. So part of the reason why, as we were thinking through a lot of our transitions, we were thinking about how many other organizations have been going through this as well and how we can learn from each other. And so there's going to be opportunity hopefully for dialogue through this conversation. Just to give you some idea of our impacts at Homeless Connect really briefly. First, for those of you who are familiar with us, you know that we host this annual large-scale event in the fall, and over 1,000 individuals attend the events with approximately 100 service providers, which on average is about 300 providers, and approximately 400 different community volunteers. And so usually at our events, it's a gathering of approximately 2,000 individuals in one building. With that being said, we know that this fall, we may have to drastically transform what our fall event looks like due to things like social distancing, the limits on large gatherings, requirements for PPE, and all of this is forcing us to rethink our own logistics and the numbers. And one of the main things that we really think about is how to keep the community aspect and how can we still foster that, especially if we aren't able to gather and meet together in the scale that we normally do. Another area that we've been impacted this year was with our youth events. So this spring, we were really excited because we're launching a new youth program, which consisted of youth leadership workshops, as well as our first ever Youth Connect event, which was supposed to happen this Sunday. Unfortunately, we weren't able to continue with the remainder of our 4 workshops, and we had to postpone the youth event because even our partner locations are closed. And so that was something as well that we've been really rethinking in terms of how to connect to individuals, whether it's youth or adults within the homelessness sector.
So the goal of today's webinar is really to create that dialogue between those who work in the homelessness sector and to prepare us for those sustainable shifts. And I'm sure all of us want to return to how things were before, but even if we were able to open our doors up again, we'll need to work within limitations, as Melody mentioned, with physical distancing, safety measures, and other regulations. Business as usual is not truly going to be business as usual. And many of you may be at that stage where you're starting to think about implementation for the long term. And what might be working for us right now may not be sustainable as long-term solutions. So we really want to shift those initial mindsets of how do we, last another month before we return back to normal, to shift that dialogue to how will we need to do things differently. And again, we really do want to create a dialogue and opportunity for questions amongst the audience. So throughout this webinar, if your organization is doing something innovative, something different, something you'd like to share, please feel free to chime in the chat function of Zoom. So for the past few weeks, there have been several headlines in the news as advocates try to focus attention to help those who are most vulnerable in the city. And as we know, for individuals without permanent housing, the pandemic has made things even more difficult, and physical distancing rules have, forced many drop-in centers and food banks to close. So in light of this, we really want to get a sense of how our service providers within our network have been impacted by the pandemic and the lockdown. And we distributed a short survey. What we saw was that most organizations had to reduce their capacity in some way, whether those were shorter hours, whether those were offering a limited number of services, or having have some of their staff work remotely. We also included a survey as part of the webinar registration, as you know, and asking you a range of questions that helped us really understand what's top of mind for everyone. And we thought it would be interesting to play that back to you now. When we asked everyone about the use of technology, most organizations felt that they were confident in the technology and platforms they use to deliver services. When we asked about the ability to provide mental health support, you can see that the results were a little bit more mixed. There were quite a few who did feel confident that they were able to provide the support, but there was a stronger variance of people who felt unsure. And we wanted to include this question because we know that mental health support is really important for this population, and we're curious to know how organizations felt about providing that to those in need. And we're going to hear from Stella's Place later on about how they've been able to maintain mental health and peer support during this time. One of the other things we're really interested to explore is maintaining relationships and forming connections amongst the pandemic. And the majority of organizations felt that the inability to have face-to-face contact has really impacted how they maintain relationships and conduct outreach. Limited access to tech and Wi-Fi from clients also further contributes to this challenge. And what was captured in the survey was also this overwhelming sentiment that working with other partners and organizations will really set us up for success as we continue to transform our services. And we took a look at the list of registrations, and with over 90 different organizations who had registered for the webinar, it really shows us that there is an interest in sharing and learning from others. And we recognize that a lot of you are facing some very similar challenges and would really benefit from hearing from what others are doing. So we really want to create that space to share best practices and hear from those who have successfully adapted their own services with those simple and innovative changes. And this is a great segue for our next few presenters. We're happy to have joining us from Away Home Canada, Chad Story and Heidi Walter. Chad is the Director of Innovation and Heidi is the Manager of Training and Implementation. And they will be sharing insights from their report on youth homelessness and COVID, as well as key challenges and successes that they've seen from frontline organizations. So with that, I will ask Heidi and Chad to take it away.
Awesome. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. There we go. Awesome. Can you see that okay?
Looks great.
Awesome. We're really excited to, thanks for having us. We're really excited to chat with you about some of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 months in relation to COVID. And we've got some lessons that we've learned from the front lines, as well as some things to think about as organizations start to look to what a post-pandemic world looks like. What I'm going to do is just start off by telling you really briefly who we are. Some of you might be familiar with Away Home Canada. We're a national coalition across Canada, but we also have partners around the world. And as a group, we are committed to preventing and ending youth homelessness. So our mandate is really focused on youth homelessness specifically, and also on prevention. So you're going to hear a lot about prevention in our talk today. What I should say is that we don't provide services directly to young people. We're in a unique position where we work with a range of community partners across Canada, particularly in Alberta and in Ontario. And we provide tools, training, supports to really build the capacity at the front lines to do work, to do prevention-based work really, really effectively. And Heidi and I are from the practice team. So Away Home focuses on 3 areas. We focus on planning, so systems planning and coordination of services, policy, so working with different government organizations, all orders of government, to develop policies that prevent and end youth homelessness, and then practice. And as I said, Heidi and I are on the practice team. So Heidi's going to tell you really briefly about how we've been responding to the need from youth serving organizations during the COVID pandemic.
Thank you, Chad. Yes, so really excited to be here this morning with all of you, and thank you for having us. As Chad said, we've been working closely with other national partners, including the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. Some of you folks might know them as CAH, to help coordinate this sector's response to COVID. Our focus has been making sure that youth-serving organizations are being taken care of during this time of need. We are hosting regularly community practice calls every Tuesday at 11 a.m. till noon, that's Eastern Standard Time. And we post those summaries on the calls, or the summaries of the calls on the Homelessness Learning Hub, which can be found if you type into Google Homelessness Learning Hub, you will find them there. The purpose of these calls is to provide a space for folks that are working together in the homelessness sector, really to have a place to come together, share their resources, offer support, and honestly have thinking partners outside of the usual suspects that they work with on a day-to-day basis. The work with our national partners also includes coordinating a post-pandemic response. So in other words, how do we make some of the initiatives that are currently underway in response to COVID-19 permanent for the people that are experiencing homelessness? Today, we're going to tell you a little bit more about what we've been learning from our community partners, not only on those community of practice calls, but with our regular check-ins that we have weekly, and how they've been adapting their services in response to the pandemic, and the lessons that some of you might find valuable to take back to your work.
So as Heidi mentioned, we've been engaged in a whole bunch of activities to support youth serving organizations. And I think it's really important to note that the reason why we have developed a youth-focused response to COVID is that we know that the needs of young people, particularly young people who have experience with homelessness or are currently experiencing homelessness, are very distinct from adults. And so one of those activities is a survey that we've done. We're actually in the process of developing another survey. But the first survey was really to start to identify what are the specific needs of youth serving organizations during this time. We've published a report and an executive summary that you can download at awayhome.ca if you're interested in getting that, and we'll make sure everyone has a link to it. And then I would also encourage you to take part in our second survey, where we really dig into some of the issues that we identified in the first survey. So there's questions around funding. We're starting to think about what does that post-pandemic recovery actually look like, and really digging into the issues that communities are grappling with. The survey itself, the responses, they reflect the opinions of 60 plus organizations from across Canada. So I think in that sense, it's a really good kind of broad spectrum of opinions that the survey captures. And we're going to dig into some of the results today. We're not going to go into detail. I just wanted to share with you some of the highlights. And then, as Heidi mentioned, what we're going to do is kind of summarize what we've learned through the survey, but also through the in-person consultations and community practice calls that we've been doing to offer up some lessons learned to date. So the first round of results that I think are interesting, these are the responses of youth-serving organizations that are supporting young people who are currently experiencing homelessness. And one of the key issues that they're challenged with right now is making sure that the basic needs of young people are being met. And this includes everything from making sure that they have access to clean clothes, that they have laundering facilities. Food insecurity has been a challenge in a number of communities as well. And so providing those very basic needs that young people have has been a real struggle for different service providers. The other, which is probably not a surprise to many of you, and this is a challenge that anyone who's providing frontline services, whether that be in the homelessness sector or outside of the sector, is getting access to personal protective equipment has been a challenge, and we've seen that be a persistent challenge, particularly in rural communities. And so that's something that we've been trying to do our best to try to source and find PPE and make that available to folks as much as we can. In terms of what we're hearing from youth, so the challenges that youth specifically are faced with is that many drop-in centers across the country have closed. And this is a real challenge because those drop-in centers are usually places that young people go to get access to those basic needs. And in many ways, drop-in centers and outreach activities, they're often the one source of routine that young people have in their lives. And so a disruption in that is a disruption in the routines that they've had. This is starting to change as we see lockdown measures being kind of lifted in provinces across Canada, but it still does present a problem, particularly outreach services. And those are services where an organization might go out into, say, a youth encampment or something like that, and making sure that they've got what they need. The other that's a real problem, and this is something that continues to be a problem, is, and this is one of the questions that we have in a series of questions in the second survey, is to really dig into the needs of 2S LGBTQI plus young people, as well as Indigenous youth and youth from racialized communities. We know that the resources that they need are sometimes a little bit different. And for young people, for instance, that identify as LGBTQS, we hear accounts of them having to go home if they need to self-isolate or to quarantine, and they might be going into situations that are not particularly safe, as well as situations where they may have to go back into the closet and things like that. And so we really do need to find ways, and there's been some really promising examples. For instance, EGAL has provided some resources to young people to help them cope in those kinds of situations. The other area is the needs of service providers that are dealing with young people who are currently housed. And so they've got a number of challenges that are slightly distinct from those, from organizations that are dealing with young people who are homeless. The key areas around social isolation and mental health, and those two things are obviously related to one another. I think for all of us, we are experiencing, being isolated for a long period of time is really challenging, and human beings desire person-to-person connection. And so for young people who already have mental health challenges that they're dealing with, that they're exacerbated with the social isolation. And so we see a number of instances where young people are really struggling. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how organizations are getting around that. And Stella's place, that's a really great example of that as well. In terms of the specific youth needs, the one area that continues to be a problem, and it keeps coming up on calls and in conversations that we're having with people, is that many young people are starting to access CERB and other financial supports, the student emergency benefit, things like that. There's two challenges that come with that. One is that for many young people, they don't have the money management skills to kind of to deal with such a large lump sum of money all at once. And so we see instances of young people using those funds to purchase substances and things like that. We also know, and we hear from our community partners, that there's been an increase in the number of opioid related deaths. And so that's a challenge. The other issue that we're hearing more and more about is that many young people are accessing these financial supports, and because the government, there's an immediate need, and there is I think in many ways a great response, in that many people are being able to access these financial supports really quickly. There are many young people, though, however, that are not necessarily qualified for CERB. And so we're really curious to know, from a policy perspective, what are the long-term implications of that? Will young people have to pay back those funds? How will it impact the HST credits that they may get access to if they're receiving social assistance from other programs? Will that result in them having those funds be clawed back? So it's an issue that we continue to monitor. And it's one that I think that we're going to, as we think about what the post-pandemic recovery looks like, have a policy response to. The other two areas is boredom. So young people who have been in isolation for a while now, they're really finding it challenging to kind of remain, to occupy their time. And so we hear from case managers in communities that they're really having to think about creative ways to keep them occupied and safe and connected to home. So those are kind of some top line takeaways that we're seeing from the survey. Really encourage you to download it if you want to dig into that. And if you do have a chance, please do complete the second survey. The more responses we have, the better. What we want to do is switch directions a little bit and tell you about, what do all of these survey results mean? What do all of these anecdotes and stories that we're hearing from communities mean? And so we've arrived at kind of 3 innovative lessons from the front line that we think you will find relevant. So the first is around technology. And so I think it's pretty obvious to say that we're all using technology. I think this Zoom call is an example of that we're using technology as a way to stay connected to one another. And that in itself is not novel or new. Most people have access to the internet and use the internet regularly. A lot of the young people that our community partners work with, they have access to phones and they're able to text and things like that. I think what is unique about technology is that we're really striving to try to find the human side of technology. I think for so long, the use of technology has been seen as very transactional and quite a cold way of interacting with people. But we see a number of examples of people trying to really humanize technology and to provide a human face. We do know that there's Zoom fatigue to some extent, but we do really see some great examples of community organizations and individuals really trying to find that human side of technology and to mimic those kinds of human-to-human connections that we're all really craving right now.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is I don't think many of us would consider picking up the telephone as old technology, but many of the youth that the agencies that we support across Canada would say that using the phone and saying hello on it is not new technology, but it's old technology. And so we're seeing a trend where youth are starting to use the older technology. For instance, or we're seeing and hearing from organizations that they've started to adapt their services for clients. And these aren't just for you specific, because we know that many of you are also supporting adults within the sector. And so doctors allowing visits to be held over the phone instead of having to come in for an appointment. Telephone counseling services have increased, and agencies are offering those services in a more robust way these days. In some of the programs that we've spoken to, staff are reporting that youth are engaging in mental health services more and frequently because of the barriers removing, like having to get on a bus across the city to sit in a therapist's office, things that youth are not interested in doing, but all of a sudden, because they're able to be in the comfort of their own home, that they're more willing to engage on a regular basis. Excuse me. Also being able to use apps like Zoom and House Party, 2 apps that our youth and clients were not using several months ago, have really become popular. One program in Ottawa that we work closely with shared that a young person in their Housing First for Youth program who's currently enrolled in an arts post-secondary course actually performed their musical piece that they created for staff. Not only did this give the youth an opportunity to show their skills, it also allowed the staff to sit in that youth world for a moment and connect with them in a way that they had never been able to before. Because of this, the relationship is stronger between that caseworker and the youth, and they have a deeper connection. Some youth have received food hampers, and we are very appreciative of those hampers that have come to our youth. And the food that they're receiving in those hampers, some of them, they're not familiar with how to cook those vegetables. So staff are hosting improv cooking shows, teaching how to cook particular vegetables, or how to use ingredients, almost like a pantry raid, and staff being able to support youth with how to cook with what they have in their house.
So the other area that we're seeing is this idea. So I think within the kind of innovation space, there's the term disruption that's often used to describe, we need disruption, we need to iterate things, we need to hack things, we need to try new things. And I think for many of us that work within the social services sector, the notion of disruption is a bit problematic. But another way of thinking about it is this idea that discomfort can lead to opportunity. And we're seeing a number of examples of this right now. At the organizational level, we're seeing a lot of organizations really have to focus in on and to really fine tune what their mission is. So I think, for a lot of organizations over time, there's mission creep. So, you're trying to serve a lot of different organizations or a lot of different populations. And so moments like this, where you're really forced to think about the resources that you have, has been a clarifying moment for a lot of organizations to really think about who they are as an organization and what kind of services do they offer that are distinct from other community organizations. So that's been really good. The other thing too that's been really exciting is that for many organizations who have been working on maybe technology projects or other special projects, this has really forced them to accelerate the pace of those projects. So the projects may have been underway for a long time, and they've kind of sat on the side of someone's desk because of all the day-to-day needs that need to be fulfilled. And so COVID has really again brought back that focus to say we really need to get that app off of out the door. We really need to update our website. And in many ways, this moment of discomfort has led to opportunity as well.
In some of the trainings that we offer through A Way Home, we often you will often find us talking about 3 levels of support that you can offer. And unfortunately, I can't go into detail with them, but it's more about doing with your client, doing for your client, and sometimes doing nothing at all. What Chad was providing us a lead into is that sometimes building in a healthy level of tension provides opportunity for our youth and our clients to excel. This is difficult to do sometimes in our everyday work, because sometimes we will be hand holding, or sometimes we'll just pick up that phone to make that phone call for the client that we're supporting, and so on and so forth. But however, with COVID, we've been hearing and seeing that some of our youth have been pushed to be more independent. They might not know it, or they might not realize it during this time, but they have been making small steps forward. So we've been really focusing with staff to show the youth the importance of how important these steps are, and to make sure that they're pointing them out and allowing them to realize their own potential. Youth are building their self-esteem, they're building independence and self-sufficiency skills simply by asking questions like how to cook a turnip when you get that in your food hamper, knocking on their landlord's door to let them know that their rent check is going to be a little bit late because the mail is just is slower these days, and talking to a neighbor, taking the time to stop and say hello simply because it's another human that's at the mailbox at that time. One of our youth who identifies as trans has started to take transit, a task that they once thought was going to be impossible for them. they have started to realize that less people were on the bus. And so the youth felt safer trying to take transit and face their fears, and has been doing an incredible job, and now actually has lessened their anxiety around taking transit because they were given the opportunity within the pandemic to try these skills that they once thought were not going to be achievable. Really, honestly, regardless of the stage of change our clients are at, we're hearing that in general, youth have been almost forced to grow their skills while being supported from afar.
The third lesson that we've been learning is that family matters more than ever. And we know that for a lot of young people, they are looking at relationships that maybe have been strained over time. And so it might be difficult for them to go, crash at mom and dad's, and it might not necessarily be an option. But what we're also seeing is that there's an openness to start to think about how we might go about repairing those relationships.
Young people that we're supporting across those programs that Chad spoke about earlier are really considering relationships that they have previously been disconnected from or have been truly strained. We know from the Housing First and the Housing First for Youth core principles that social isolation can cause greater harm to the youth and even the adults that we are supporting, which is why it's important to ensure that when we are working with youth and any client at any age in our programs, that we're also focusing on building and connecting them to their family and natural supports. Communities have shared with us that more and more youth are connecting to their families during this time. Some youth that we've heard directly from are sharing that they've honestly had time to sit in their apartment and think about what's important to them, and think about how to pick up that phone and say hello after that long time that they've had away from their family and friends. They're in a similar situation right now because of the pandemic as their family and natural supports, their neighbors, their convenience store owners that they visit. So connecting and having this pandemic in common makes it a little bit easier for them to say hello, and gives them a topic to start off on. These people that our youth and the clients are reaching out to are people that they're familiar with, or that they've seen, or that they've been in contact with, and who are a part of their network. And so lots of the work that we're doing with programs right now across Canada is making sure that this work and these strides of connecting the clients to family and natural supports don't go to the wayside once this pandemic is over. Is that we all need people in our lives in order to move forward and in order to be successful. And so how do we ensure that that work continues and we have a strong focus, regardless of the position and regardless of where in the sector we work, to ensure that all of the people that are most vulnerable are connected to family and natural supports.
So if we can leave you with one thing from all of the takeaways that we have, is that as you start thinking about how you're going to plan for the future, there really does need to be a focus on prevention. We've had the crisis response over the last 3 months, and it was a necessity. We had to respond to the need as it presented itself. But the more that we can invest in prevention and think about prevention, the more that we can ensure that there isn't a second wave of outbreak, and that young people get the supports that they need.
We thank you for your time. We know that not all of you are supporting youth directly, but for those who are, or for those who would like to hear more about our work or how that it can impact or work within your sector, we wanted you to reach out and let you know that we are here to support you and your work and your teams. If you're interested in incorporating a family natural supports approach, or if you are interested in training or supports in any other areas of your work, please reach out to us and we can talk about how to further support you in your learnings and our learnings and your incredible work that you're doing in the community.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks so much, Chad and Heidi. That was really great, and so great to hear what you're doing and what you've learned, and thank you for sharing that with us. Up next, we have Heidi Sasek, who is Access Team Manager from Stella's Place. She's going to be walking us through their experience in terms of shifting some of their services to be offered virtually, and what were some successes from that, what were some challenges. So with that, Heidi, take it away. And as Heidi is setting up, I just want to encourage everyone, if you do have questions for any of our presenters, to please type in those questions in the chat function.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. Just a quick sound check. Bonnie, can you hear me okay?
Yep, loud and clear.
Awesome. So as Bonnie said, I'm gonna talk just a little bit about who we are, just briefly, and then how we've adapted our services during this time during COVID. So Stella's Place is a community mental health organization. We serve participants between the ages of 16 to 29. And pre-COVID, we had our actual physical space in downtown Toronto, and that's where we operated. So we provide mental health services, both low barrier and then also clinical and peer integration services, where folks would do an access process or a registration process and then get into groups. But then we also, pre-COVID, had a lot of drop-in programs and a general drop-in space for folks who could come and access support. So that's who we are, and that's how we functioned before COVID started. And now I'm just going to talk a little bit about kind of our immediate response, how we've adapted, some of our gaps, some of the things that we've had to consider and think through all of this, and then also where we're considering going and things that we're thinking about in terms of how we can come back but still be safe for our staff and for our participants. So immediately after we decided that we needed to respond to COVID and the pandemic that was happening, we closed our physical space and we had to move 90% of our services into virtual versions. And there are some services that we haven't been able to bring into virtual, and then the majority we were able to. So initially a lot of our services, so our one-on-one services offered, we went through phone and chat. We also did our registered groups, which were in the middle of running. So things like our DBT group, so dialectical behavioral therapy group, and our RAP group. We started doing individual support as well. So we moved those into an individual version, again, via phone or chat. And then we started our studio art group. So it's an art group that really focuses on community and getting together to do activities, specifically art, but a lot of it is around connecting and being part of our community. And we started up an email discussion group. And we did that via, of course, making sure that things like consent to share emails, things like that, making sure folks were well informed of what they were signing up for, but then offering, if folks did want to do that, to kind of get together and share different projects that people started working on at home in isolation with each other and discussing those things. And then our cafe, which is actually the picture that you can see right here, is our general area where you first walk into. It was actually an open drop-in space during the day. And so what we did is we extended our BBC Hours, which is our beanbag chat app, which we did have previous to COVID. And this app allows folks to connect on their phone, on a computer, by downloading an app, and they can chat live with one of our peer support staff. So we extended those hours to allow for folks to be able to chat right now we're going from noon until 9 p.m., whereas before it was from 4 to 9 p.m. So we extended those hours to cover our drop-in hours so folks could still chat and get connection. Usually when you drop into our face-to-face space, there are peer supporters available in that space to provide support, but then also informal support and just being part of a community and chatting with other people that might be in the space. So that was initially what we did to kind of get our services up in some capacity so that folks weren't left with anything. And some of the other work that we did was reaching out to folks that we knew came into our space, especially our drop-in space and drop-in programs, and reaching out to them. So our peer support staff reached out to our participants who come into the drop-in space via email, via phone, whichever way method they were able to do, and we reached out to check in on them and see how they were doing to try to keep that engagement up. And a lot of those participants said, you know, I probably wouldn't have reached out because I thought everything was closed, and I'm so thankful that someone reached out to me to tell me, like, hey, we're still here and we still care and we can provide services in these different ways. So those are some of the things we did initially. So the next phase was kind of thinking about the next few weeks after COVID was, okay, how can we bring back some of the pieces that we may have lost from our face-to-face services? So one thing was, how can we get an online version so people can see us face-to-face? So via chat, via phone, we already had, but how can folks now see us? And that came to online options. And so some of the things that we need to consider was being HIPAA compliant, making sure that folks' privacy and confidentiality was secure, being user-friendly. So we wanted something easy that folks found easy to use. We wanted to make sure that we had correct facilitation options. So what I mean by that is, for example, if we were running a group via Zoom, are people able to chat? Because sometimes via Zoom, you can do things like breakout groups, which are great, but sometimes when you have a large group, it's hard to kind of get a word in. And so we want to encourage people to be able to chat with each other as folks are talking. And so what are those options? Things like, should we limit private conversations? Because then a facilitator can't monitor those. And also for safety, would folks feel more safe knowing that folks can't privately communicate, they can communicate to everyone or to the facilitators privately? So things like that. So what were the options of different platforms? And then also, is it accessible and where are gaps? So of course, some of the gaps that folks have already mentioned in today's webinar is some people don't have access to technology, to Wi-Fi, to the actual hardware. So thinking through those gaps and reaching out, as we talked about today, to our community partners. So EVAs and YMCA, for example, reaching out to them and figuring out what services are they providing, what are they still doing, so that we can kind of breach our gaps with other organizations. So that kind of landed us then at considering, while we are still able to do peer support individually and counseling and things like that individually, how do we bring back those opportunities to participate in a community and receive informal peer support? And by that, I mean just coming into our space, meeting someone who's also there and kind of connecting with that person. So being able to bring back that community feeling that we had in a lot of our low barrier and drop-in programs. So we really had to think through those pieces. The studio email group was an example of that. So via email, being able to share different projects that people are doing and see what other participants are doing. So it is led by our peer support staff, but then also seeing other community members who are also there getting support, and being able to chat with them about, you know, I did this painting at home, or I was able to, you know, do this drawing, check it out. So those sorts of things. And then also, how can we do that via chat and Zoom options? So can we use breakout rooms to kind of make smaller groups so that folks can kind of check in with each other and get that informal peer support? So that was a piece that we also recognized was missing from our online offerings initially, and we really thought through how can we bring that back, because it is extremely important to Stella's place. And who we are, and the support that we're offering is being part of our community and being able to support each other informally, as well as get support from our staff. The last thing we kind of troubleshooted through was, how can we bring back a group component? So a lot of the things I was talking about before went into this. So how can we were running registered mental health groups, so RAP, DBT at the time, and those had moved into individual support. And we really wanted to talk about how can we bring it back. likely with the environment that's happening right now, we're going to probably want to bring our groups back last because of social distancing and things like that. So making sure we had a sustainable way to run these groups. And a lot of the power in these groups is being able to connect with each other and have that group component. So some of the things, again, that we had to think through with this was making sure that they're low barrier, especially for our drop-in programming. So our drop-in groups and things like that, considering folks' safety, their accessibility, and then how to keep them engaged. And then lastly, our front end work. So we do have access on our access team, the team I manage, we do have access coordinators. So they're kind of our front desk folk, and they work closely with our peer support staff, and they do a lot of the admin pieces. So if we were to open up a drop-in group via online or Zoom, how is that going to look in terms of front end? How do you get someone registered? What if it's their first time ever coming to Stella? So there's things like getting consent, making sure they know what they're signing up for, making sure that they have the ability to access the group and they know what it will look like. Making sure we have their contact information in case something were to happen or a safety issue came up. So a lot of those things we have to think through if we wanted to open up drop-in programs. And so here are some of the solutions that we came to. So with all of those considerations and troubleshooting, we ended up looking at a number of online options. So Doxy is an online, it's free. It is something that you can use for individual. We found it worked best for individual. Again, you can upgrade your account, but the initial ones are free. It's very user-friendly, it's very easy to use, and great for individual services. We also know that there's a Zoom account that you can pay a monthly cost for, and you can upgrade to a PHIPA version. And we found this ideal for groups, and some of that is the option. So breakout groups, for example, is an option via Zoom. You can do the Hollywood Square so you can see everyone's face. There is advanced chat functions. So we ended up deciding that we want to limit private chats happening so that folks can feel more safe, and that also a facilitator can monitor anything that might be coming up, and just be there to support in case someone said something that they really needed support around, and being able to offer that support. There was other functions, for example, like if someone maybe accidentally left their camera on and left and something was distracting in the background, being able to actually turn that person's camera off, and things like that. So we found for those reasons that we would prefer to use Zoom for groups. And so what we ended up doing was launching our studio group, which is our art-based group that we did via email initially. We ended up launching that. The email is still happening, but then going online with it and opening up a drop-in. We also have same-day drop-in counseling happening as well. And those, so those folks can kind of just call in that day of the studio group or the day of the walk-in counseling, and they can either call in, email in, whatever works for them, and just let us know that they want to sign up, and then our front end will do that and get them all ready to go and make sure that they kind of troubleshoot and make sure they know what they're signing up for. So we're able to create that so that folks can actually participate in a group and see other people and chat and all of those things, which was one of the pieces we were worried about that we were losing with just individual services. And then our groups. So our last round of groups has finished, but we will be running our next round of groups, our summer round, via Zoom. So there'll be a group component and an individual support component to those groups. So folks still are able to get informal support, still able to kind of feel part of a community, and then also get support individually from their clinician or from their peer supporter. So a lot of our registered programming, as I said, those folks would have done an intake and registered for those programming, but what we really wanted to make sure still existed was our drop-in low barrier stuff. And then so I touched on this a little bit, but we did end up doing same day drop-in counseling, our studio group, and we were running DBT refresh as a drop-in as well. So what that means is instead of physically dropping in, folks can email us, call us, and just let us know that they want to be a part of it, and we'll get them signed up so that they can participate in those programs. And so, like I said, a lot of the front end considerations that we had to go through were new participants. How are we going to onboard them? How are we going to confirm all their information? Make sure that we get consent, make sure that they know what they're signing up for. So our front end staff have to do that. So if it's a new person, they'll kind of give them a rundown of what Stella's is all about, get a lot of their information verbally, and then get them signed up. And then for our pre-existing participants, just confirming all of their information. Other considerations that we had to take in were making sure that they know, this is going to be a Zoom room. You're going to get a link half an hour before. This is what it'll look like. You can turn your mic off. You can turn your camera off. There's going to be 2 facilitators there, and they will support you through the group. And just making sure folks also had our group comfort agreement ahead of time. So just knowing what they're kind of signing in for to ensure that we're being trauma informed and folks are feeling safe in that space. Accessibility, so just considering things like, are people more comfortable with phone chat online? So for example, walk-in counseling, or drop-in counseling as we call it now, being able to chat or phone or online and checking with participants about that. What are you more comfortable doing? What is best for your current situation? And also acknowledging some of those gaps that we talked about before in our accessibility. It was actually brought up by Heidi and Chad about folks who previously actually found it inaccessible to come into our space because of mental health reasons, anxiety, just distance, things like that. So where we now have other gaps, some of our gaps have been changed. So for example, a lot of folks are saying to us, I was never able to get into the space because of my anxiety and participate in your studio art group, but now I am able to do that. I'm so excited by that opportunity. So a lot of people are engaging who found there were barriers in engaging in our services before. And again, being mindful of new gaps that we now have. Whereas before you could just drop into our space and you didn't need technology or Wi-Fi or the actual hardware to do it. Now you do. So things like that. And again, our approach to that is really reaching out to our community partners and filling those gaps and figuring out where folks are doing services that we're maybe not providing and really communicating about that sort of thing. The other piece that we wanted to make sure was that sometimes in our face-to-face groups, safety things would come up in group. And so in our, let's say our art studio group, when we're facilitating it via Zoom, we have 2 facilitators in that group, 2 peer facilitators. How do we make sure that if someone's safety or something was going on or they became dysregulated, how would we respond to that as the facilitators in that group? Part of it is prevention. So part of it is our frontline staff, our access coordinators check in before. And it's just a brief check-in just to see, where's your distress level? How are you today? Can I support you? And providing any necessary support before the group and letting them know, here's some things that you can do, all of that. And then also having those procedures in place for our facilitators beforehand in the event that were to happen. So things like that. And then at the end, our access coordinators provide an attendance sheet virtually to our facilitators, so our facilitators know who to expect in the group and things like that. Also part of safety is just knowing how to contact that participant if something were to happen, their technology disconnects or they leave the group suddenly, just knowing that we can get in contact with them and check in and see if everything's okay. So those are some of our front end considerations that we went through with being able to still provide low barrier programs that you don't need to have registered previously before. You can literally just call in, be a brand new person and access these programs. So literally anyone between 16 and 29 could come to any of these services today. Some of the things that we did go through, and again, I touched on this a little already, but in our groups, so when we're running our groups online, what are some things to consider? So making sure our activities are accessible as we can make them. So, before, if you came to our studio art group, we would have all the materials ready for you. Now we don't. So making sure that the activities that we're asking folks to do or suggesting or inviting them to do in those kind of community gatherings are things that are as accessible as we can make them, or creative, and providing many options. So whatever folks have at home, they can actually use for those things. Other things are comfort agreements that we adapted for online delivery. So letting people know, like, I may need to mute you if there's like distracting noises, or, you know, we will only be allowed to chat with everyone or privately to the host. So just being really trauma informed in our approach to be making sure that everyone knows kind of the guidelines, how things will operate beforehand, and then also going over it in groups so folks can feel safe. Other things are like ensuring that you have your computer turned away so no one else can see the screen for confidentiality reasons, and just kind of bringing that into and asking folks to be really mindful about privacy and confidentiality while they're participating in our group. So things like that. And then also facilitation. How are we going to divide the activities? Who's going to watch the chat? Those sorts of things. I mentioned protocols around participants becoming dysregulated or safety issues coming up. Protocols when participants have technical issues. So if someone's really struggling with the technology, what are we going to do? How are we going to support them? And to give you an idea, a lot of that, for example, technical issues will be asking one of our frontline access coordinators to jump in and support that person so the facilitators can keep on facilitating. And then also going through our Zoom. So we played a lot with our Zoom permissions to make sure that we thought through every permission and how we would want the group to look, and then able to communicate that transparently to participants. So those are kind of the things that we've done. We are now thinking about how we can bring back face-to-face components safely with social distancing and what that's going to look like. And likely we're going to do a combination of what we've seen work with our online and virtual, and then also how we can add some of and fill some of the gaps that our virtual is not hitting in face-to-face in a safe and socially distant way. And we're currently, as a management team, working through that, getting feedback from our participants, listening also to our frontline staff about safety and those sorts of things. So that's kind of where we're going now. And as some folks mentioned, there's a lot to consider in terms of how to keep folks safe in a space if we were to come back face-to-face, and what that will look like. So those are currently where we're going, and that's kind of where we've been so far. Last thing I wanted to just share really, really quickly with everyone was we did do a survey of our participants, just asking them, you know, what's working for you right now, what's not working for you. Again, we serve folks, a lot of them are in Toronto, but we don't have a catchment area, so 16 to 29. And so some of the trends that we're seeing, first of all, is that folks are really engaging with peer support, and they're feeling that peer support is really being helpful, especially in COVID. It helps them to feel more hope, hear from someone else who's experiencing things. You know, our peer supporters can say like, yeah, I'm also struggling with COVID, and here are some of the things I've been doing to support myself during this time. And it's helping them feel less isolated and less alone in all of this, and more able to share their discomfort with all the uncertainty that's happening right now. So some of the things that we did get back from our survey that we sent out, so we had over 100 responses from our participants. More than half reported an increase in their distress levels since COVID. So that was something that we weren't altogether surprised by. A lot of folks are reporting that their distress levels are going up right now. Just under 30% of participants reported a decrease in their ability to cope since COVID. "82% of our participants reported an increase in their feelings of isolation since COVID-19. And again, you recall that peer support, folks are reporting that it's really helping them feel less isolated because they can connect with someone who has lived experience and can share some of their own coping strategies, and who is also going through coping during COVID. So, you know, increase in hope and decrease in isolation is some of the core outcomes of our peer support programs. Many of our participants also reported social connection as being helpful in managing their mental health through COVID. And I will say that in the survey, we asked about coping strategies, and the resilience and flexibility of our participants is just incredible, and their willingness to engage with us in these new and strange ways via virtual and all of that has been absolutely incredible. And all of our participants are just so resilient, and they had a lot of coping strategies, but one of the main ones that they reported was social connection. So being able to connect with someone was very helpful in coping. Many reported that the most challenging part was isolation of COVID-19, and then challenging living situations, which we touched on as well. So just having living situations that they've had to go back to that are really challenging. And then, of course, loss of employment and supports in the community. Video chat was actually the most preferred method of contact at Stella's Place for our programming. And the most requested programs that we had were DBT Refresh, and then a drop-in peer support group that focuses on COVID and coping during COVID. So those were the top two programs that they wanted to see. DBT Refresh is also a peer-led program, so actually both these programs are peer support programs. And so those are the top two things that our participants wanted to see in our programming. And so before I said 90% of our programs have come into a virtual offering. And then some of them, that 10%, some of them we're going to be adapting. So things that folks wanted before, they actually want to see a change and see something a little bit different right now to support them. So a COVID drop-in peer support group might be one of those offerings that we bring in. And currently DBT Refresh is going to be running. So folks who want to refresh on their dialectical behavioral therapy skills and just drop in and get that support from a peer can do that. I accidentally skipped this slide, so really quick.
Sorry, Heidi, we're actually close to time, so I am going to see if you can actually share the last of the slides with everyone.
Yeah.
They can access that after, and I'm going to quickly wrap up just to be, make sure that we do wrap up a little bit past 12. All right, thanks so much, everyone. So we've been monitoring the chat, and it's great to see there's so much discussion going on with everyone, and hopefully, we're sharing resources. There were a few questions I think directed to Heidi for Stella's Place, questions around how do you tackle internet time and cost of minutes as a barrier. Also, what does a group comfort agreement look like? Unfortunately, because we're short on time, we don't have a chance to cover that during the webinar. But for those who ask those questions, we'll make sure that we can perhaps grab the response from Heidi and share that with the rest of the group, or we can provide her contact in case you have follow-up questions. All right, so for the last few minutes, we want to end off the webinar with a few thoughts from Homeless Connect as we look forward to what's next. So at Homeless Connect, we're still trying to figure out how our role is going to evolve and how we might be able to deliver these large-scale events in the future. And as we do so, we're going to continue to keep you updated and keep you engaged in joining us and involving your services, perhaps in a virtual nature. We'll also continue to support you by flagging volunteer opportunities with our networks, and also sharing helpful resources as they come up. One of the things that we wanted to highlight was a few tools created by Ample Labs. They're a tech nonprofit based out of Toronto, whose mission is really to empower those at risk or experiencing homelessness in the city. And one of the ways they do so is through their AI-powered chatbot Chalmers. And for those of you who aren't familiar with it, they allow for quick searches for services like free meals, shelter, clothing banks within the city in a real-time manner, either through desktop or through mobile. And they work with 211 Ontario to make sure that those services are updated. They're also recently building COVIDbot, which is similarly designed as a chatbot, but providing people true and accurate information on COVID-19, providing tips, FAQs, and also community resources that aren't typically listed in 211. Things like care-mongering groups or resources to combat social isolation. In light of the pandemic, a lot of these resources have sprung up, and so this is a great way to consolidate this. Since April, they've really seen a 10 times increase in uptake of these services. And if you're interested in learning more, or perhaps you have services or resources that would be helpful to be listed in either of these resources, please reach out to us afterwards and we can definitely connect you. Last but not least, we want to continue creating these opportunities for those working in the space to share ideas. Hopefully you've heard something that was interesting and valuable today. We are going to be sending a post-webinar survey to capture ideas and gather topics that are top of mind. If there was something here that you'd like to explore more, or topics that you were anticipating that you didn't hear us cover, please let us know so that we can carve that space for those conversations. And with that, we really thank you for your time. We want to give a special thanks to Away Home Canada, as well as Stella's Place. It was really great to hear you guys and what you're doing in this space. I think everyone's really excited to hear that there have been a lot of learnings and successes, and we can definitely appreciate those challenges and having you guys share that with us. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach us at the email provided. We will be looking to upload a recording of the webinar as soon as possible, because we know that may be of interest of you to share with others in your organization, and also looking to share the slides that you've seen today as a PDF format. Again, thank you so much, and we really hope to hear and see from you guys again very soon.